Welcome to the Sex Reimagined podcast. This is Leah Piper, your Tantra expert here on the show, and I'm with Dr. Willow Brown, the Taoist expert here. And we've got a treat in store for you.
Absolutely. Today we had a lovely interview with Irene Fehr. She's a certified coach, sex and intimacy expert, and she really works deeply with couples who primarily the woman is no longer feeling her juju and hasn't been for a while, and also happens to be a highly sensitive person. So we really unpack what highly sensitive people are, HSPs as they are termed these days, and how the relationships can thrive and not just survive, but come into thriving. So you're going to love this episode. Tune in, turn on, and fall in love with Irene Fehr.
Welcome to the Sex Reimagined podcast, where sex is shame-free and pleasure-forward. Let's get into the show.
Welcome, Irene. We cannot wait to start talking about your work with couples and also highly sensitive people, because there are many of us out there that get overstimulated very quickly. And your research and your unique perspective on this, I think, is going to really open the hearts and minds of so many people who may be struggling with their partner who's highly sensitive, or maybe for someone out there who's highly sensitive and has a lot of self-judgment and shame about that.
Yeah, maybe you could start by giving us sort of a definition and some parameters about what an HSP, a highly sensitive person, is, because that term is being passed around quite a lot these days. And once people kind of hear it more defined and more explained, they're like, oh, I am that too. Oh, that explains so much. So let's start there.
Well, thank you for having me here and for having this conversation. And to start with defining an HSP, so there are two levels of sensitivity when we're talking, or two things that define a highly sensitive person. One being that they are stimulated or overstimulated by a lot of things. It could be things in the environment, such as noise, such as traffic. It could be emotional stimulation from taking on energy in the room from everyone else. But that's not the only aspect of being highly sensitive that's important to acknowledge. The other piece is that all of this information that comes towards a highly sensitive person, they are likely to process it and over-process it more. So the brain is not only taking in all this information, but again, it's spending an enormous amount of time and energy processing it, making sense of it. And so a highly sensitive person is going to be overwhelmed by all these external forces and may also be overwhelmed by their own processing, by their own need to make sense of all of that information. And that can lead to overstimulation, that could lead to a kind of overwhelm that results in armoring, right? It's just so much. And we end up protecting ourselves, or the nervous system shuts down to protect us from all of this.
So if I hear you say, if I'm hearing this correctly, you would define it as there's sort of a sensory overstimulation, right, in the environment with sensory stimulation, or just feeling the emotional impact, more of empathic sensation in the room by feeling other people's energy. And when you say processing, I think what you're saying is that there's a lot of thoughts that are arising that might be circulating. Would you call that rumination, or is it something different than rumination?
Well, I think rumination can have a negative connotation. It could have kind of a traumatic connotation. We're trying to process what happened. We're trying to regain safety. I think for a highly sensitive person, it doesn't have to be that way. It is more of connecting the dots, making sense of what this information means, and also just making sense of all the experiences inside, the physical reactions to the stimulus, what the emotions are telling them. So it's not necessarily rumination, although certainly that is part of many people's experience. Okay. But it's really just also what's the saying? When you filter out the important things, it's like separating the wheat from the
the shaft from the wheat.
The shaft from the wheat, exactly. You're trying to find what's important.
Gotcha.
Because again, there's just so much. And a lot of it is just noise.
And there are like tests and quizzes out there and things that can kind of help you define if you are an HSP, correct?
Exactly. So Elaine Aron first labeled, came up with the label highly sensitive person. She has amazing quizzes on her website where you can find out whether you are that. And then there's also, we have to understand that this is on a spectrum too, that there are very highly sensitive people who are immobilized by their sensitivity. And then there's highly functioning people who have that, but they are not immobilized by it. And then, of course, there's a lot of variations in between. So it's not like you're afflicted by being highly sensitive, but it really depends on the where you are in the spectrum.
And what happened for you when you sort of realized like, oh, I am one of these? Like, how did that shift the way that you interacted with the world around you, environments and relationships?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, growing up highly sensitive, I was told that I'm too sensitive. You're too dramatic, right? My reactions were dramatic because I was overstimulated. So there was a lot of these negative comments, right? You're too dramatic. You're thinking too much into it, things like that. And certainly in sex and intimacy, I thought that my high sensitivity was a liability, and I wasn't able to get into things just because we're thinking that I was broken sexually, not realizing that I needed to really honor my sensitivity to be able to come alive. And so when I learned about that, it gave me so much permission to take time to ask for what I needed, even though it wasn't necessarily something accepted in the mainstream, right? Like taking it slow or allowing space for connection. So it's certainly growing up, that wasn't taught. You're supposed to go straight into sex. And again, I thought I was broken because I didn't find that appealing, and it didn't work for me. It shut me down. So again, that permission to really honor the high sensitivity that I have and to welcome it, to remove some of the labels and to really see those as gifts. That's something that I can access aspects of experience that the other people who are not highly sensitive can't. Right?
Yeah, I think we
flipping
can
that
really,
around.
Yeah, we can reframe it and kind of see it as a superpower. I mean, especially in
Absolutely.
sexuality. If you're very sensitive, like that could really work for you. You could have a lot of fun with that. You just need someone who can cater to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And share a little bit about what are the talents of the highly sensitive person, both in the bedroom and outside the bedroom.
Yeah. Well, one of them is intensity. So highly sensitive also means highly responsive and someone who can feel a lot. So highly sensitive people by nature feel intensely. And so in sex and intimacy, we can access higher states of pleasure, of emotional connection, of surrender, if the circumstances are met. And I call those pre-sex needs. But when those are met, so much can happen. Again, reaching high levels of intensity, of passion, and of creativity and imagination. So that's one. The second one is connection. So one of the sensitivity aspects that I mentioned is being sensitive to energy, being sensitive to connection. And so again, the gift is that highly sensitive people can really open up and they connect deeply. So the connection is not just let's have fun, but the connection is, can we open up? Can we be vulnerable with each other? Can we reveal something of ourselves to each other? And that ties to also bringing in spirituality into that connection. So it may be connection between ourselves and a higher power, God, universe, but then also us together as a couple connected to some kind of spiritual some kind of spirit or God. So that adds a lot of richness to sex beyond the physical aspect of it.
I'm curious for both of you, because Leah, I think you definitely are an HSP. We're both on the spectrum.
Yeah,
We're
totally.
both in there.
Yeah.
I'm just curious for both of you, like how you see your gifts as an HSP transfer with your work with clients.
Well, I wonder if you would agree with this, Irene. I think there's a natural skill towards attunement.
Absolutely.
When you have an ability to attune to the people that you're working with, you can feel, you can sense, and you can often name what it is they're having a hard time naming. And in terms of what's behind the sensation that they're having, or what's behind the words that they're saying that relates to this sensation. So you can preemptively hold someone differently and follow their energy and follow their opening and track when they're closing, and being able to, from a therapeutic standpoint, ask the questions that helps them reveal more of themselves to themselves. But as one who's in lovership with somebody, you're able to anticipate and follow their system so that you're taking them on a ride. You're able to go up here and come down there and go up here and go down there. So it's not just a one-dimensional, here we're going to ride a peak and come down it. We're actually going on a journey together.
That's
I
really
love
beautiful. So well said. And yeah, I think that, with that attunement with clients, one of the things that I find is they're so deeply grateful because they haven't had that experience with anyone in their life, before. And so when they're finally like seen and met in that way, it's opens up a whole new part of themselves that they didn't have access to before. One thing that I'm sort of always on the edge of and grappling with is like, it's not me, right? It's not about me, because they'll start to project, oh, it's you, it's about you. And yes, I am like the mirror that you're looking into in this moment, but it's really to open up what's inside of you so that you can have more of that in your own life. So that's sort of the second part to my question for both of you.
Yeah.
And Irene, we still want to hear your response, but like, then when your clients are starting to be like, fall in love with you, basically, like how do you redirect it back to it being about them?
Well, I want to echo everything that you said about attunement and how beautiful it is to see clients learn something about themselves, reveal something about themselves that they didn't know, or put words to that experience. If I say something like, I sense there's a longing there, and they're like, I had no idea. I had no idea I had a longing around this. I had no idea that I felt lonely, or that I was feeling all these things. And it is a beautiful thing. And like you said, it is maybe one of the first times that they ever experience that in their lives. And what happens in a couple is that I then redirect it to the partner. And so that I'm not the one responsible for creating them, but that they can have that with a partner. The partner sees what I've done, and I empower them then to be able to do that together. Because ultimately it's not so that they keep coming to me for that experience, is that they learn to do this with themselves, and then they grow deeper with each other by continuously revealing.
Attunement is a skill you can learn.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Some people are more naturally inclined to it, but it's certainly something that you can become sensitive to. You can learn how to be more sensitive. You can learn how to be more energetically aware. You can practice presence, and all those things give people those gifts, which come in really handy if you want to be a good lover. You want to be paying attention to what's happening with your partner.
Presence is really important.
Right.
We say it all the time. We'll say it again.
It's not just fulfilling your own needs. In fact, your own needs, in my opinion, will become more fulfilled when you have circuitry between you and your partner that's operating really well, right? It's like you're sensing how they're opening or how they're closing, and you're responding appropriately to that. So how do you help a partner navigate their partner's sensitivity? What are some of the skills or the practices or the things that you sort of enlighten them to become aware of?
Well, the first thing is to understand where they're coming from in relationship to the partner and their sensitivity. Because for some people, it could be triggering. It could be either a mirror to something that they've disowned about themselves, and
Mm.
that could be triggering. It could be
Could you give
merely
an example of that?
well, I think there are way more highly sensitive people in the world that people are willing to admit. Certainly, that's true when it comes to men, because of course, men. The word sensitive for men is
Right.
uh,
Derogatory.
derogatory, exactly. So, and also the way, of course, boys have been brought up for hundreds of years has been to remove that sensitivity to make them tough. You know, boys don't cry, boys don't hurt or get disappointed. They move through all these things, and so again, boys and men in particular disown this part of themselves. And so their partner's sensitivity is going to be a trigger. I hate this in myself, and I'm going to judge and criticize my partner for
Mm,
being so sensitive. You take
mm,
so much time, you know,
mm,
this kind of attitude. And so it's
Wow.
really important to look at what's happening in me. Where am I
mhm,
being triggered? And again, what parts of myself am I disowning?
mhm.
Brilliant.
Right.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of the work you're doing with couples is not just inside of sexuality. Like it's a lot around communication, learning to listen, learning to attune.
Or
Um,
even before that, removing the barriers to all of that. Because we have
mm,
so many barriers to being able to listen and truly attune because we
mhm,
have our own triggers. We have barriers around, well, certainly education about sexuality, about women's sexual desire, which is my area of expertise. And so we have to kind of clean the field first before we build something on top.
yeah.
And again, the removing of the barriers is really important because I believe that we all naturally are more or less sensitive. We
Yeah.
all are built for connection. Where we can, when we were born, when we were babies, we are able to read our bodies. We listen to our bodies. We cannot not do that. But then we unlearn that. We become civilized in quotes, right? We become trained to live in society. And a lot of that goes against what we really need to be present, to be attuned, to be fully alive in sexuality in our sexual relationships. So it's kind of this parallel process of cleaning some of that up and then building new communication pathways, new skills, connection pathways, uh, and allowing couples to come closer together.
So beautiful. I bet they're so appreciative. What's like where do you start with, like, let's say a couple's coming in and they haven't been having sex for maybe years, and she's like, "Well, it just hurts, it's just painful." And he's just like, "What's the problem? Why can't we just have normal sex?" And she's like, "I want to breathe and eye gaze and like have more tantric experience, right?" So like
Yeah.
where do you start them off? Do you start them off with like clearing these blocks and then learning to communicate and then get into sexuality, or do you just kind of dive in with all of it together at once?
Well, first, I want to clarify that usually the area that I focus on is long term couples where they experience that dynamic not over the last month or a year, but typically several years to sometimes decades. And so it's really important that we take it slow and that I work with clients for a minimum of a year. And I set the expectation up front that, hey, you've been together for 20 years. You've developed a whole lot of patterns, a whole lot of hurts, disappointments. This cannot be solved in a session or two.
Right.
Right.
And we start slow. And yes, we start to unpack things. But we also, both things happen, like I said, the unpacking, but also the building. It's just that it's happening very slowly. And I come from a somatic experiencing background. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner. So I'm also working with their nervous system and tracking what they can handle. And distressed couples, like I described, they can't handle a lot. Their window of tolerance is very, very small. They get easily triggered. They don't know how to get out of those. And again, taking it slow, but building brick by brick is really important. And it's a very organic journey because each couple brings in different challenges. For some couples, especially couples with younger children, we work on a lot of the practical stuff of like making time to be with each other, making time for intimacy sessions, be it emotional intimacy or physical intimacy, without rushing or without falling asleep because they're at the end of the day. So I do a lot of this kind of coaching where like, okay, what needs to happen for you to have this time? Oh, babysitters, family, schedules, what needs to happen? And then again, the emotional work and the sexual work, introducing to them different ways of seeing things and clearing up a lot of misconceptions around women's sexual desire, because most people are not familiar with spontaneous versus responsive model.
Right.
And there's a tremendous amount of judgment on both women's and men's part. She's broken, right?
Right.
So much teaching happens.
I really want to dig into this part around the spontaneous versus the responsive desire. But before we do that, I'm curious, what advice do you have for someone listening who really relates to, I'm so easily triggered, or my partner is so easily triggered, and then I get triggered? What is something couples can do to start to like slow down their system as they start to feel that dump, right? Where they're starting to flood.
Yeah. Well, in fact, what they need to do has to happen way before this. And that is that when you start to realize we have a pattern, it's a predictable pattern. Like he says this, she says this, he responds in a predictable way, she responds in a predictable way, that it's important to talk about this pattern outside of when you're triggered in it. Because once you're in it, your prefrontal cortex goes offline, you act like a lizard, and you have the brain capacity of a lizard. And so nothing can happen once you're already triggered. But when you are back in green, where your prefrontal cortex is back, when you feel at ease and connected with your partner, that's the time to bring up this pattern and to try to understand and see how this dance plays out so that you can preempt it next time it happens. So it could be agreeing that, hey, when you see me raising my voice and articulating, that's the moment to please back up. Like, don't keep arguing with me or hold my hand or do something, right? You can agree on how to work with each other's triggers. But again, that has to happen ahead of time. Once you're in it, you're gone. And we all are. This is
It's
true
just
of
the way
the
the
human
brain
nervous
works.
system.
Yeah.
And the
It's
nervous
nature
system in
triggers.
particular.
Yeah,
Exactly.
for sure.
Okay, great. So yeah, please describe to us the difference between spontaneous and responsive desires and how confusing that can often be.
Yeah. So spontaneous sexual desire is what most men have and what our culture and society deems as the de facto sexual desire.
Right,
It's
this
how
is the way it
sexual desire is
works.
presented in the movies and the media and in a lot of the old models. Certainly that's how Freud saw it. And the spontaneous sexual desire model is that there is some kind of trigger. It could be seeing your partner walk by naked. It could be, I don't know, seeing a billboard model who's hot, having some kind of nice interaction with your partner or anyone. And out of that, wanting sex. It's almost like a instant spontaneous thing where there's a trigger and there's a desire for sex. And then the arousal follows that. And that this is how most men function. When they have that desire for their partner, to have sex with their partner, they can get hard and be ready for penetration sex anywhere from 20 seconds to a couple of minutes. And so all of this really takes a very, very short amount of time, which really looks spontaneous. It can arise any point out of any situation.
I have
You
a
know,
funny story about that. The other day I was in the sauna after swimming at the gym, and oh my God, there was this beautiful man, like a stallion of a man, right? I was like, dang, I was looking out of the corner of my eye, right? Oh my gosh. And then the sauna cleared out, everyone left, and he fucking got hard and started like within seconds. And it was huge. And I was like, trying not to look, but trying to look. It was one of those, just like, definitely a spontaneous moment,
yeah,
just like it is amazing, actually. It's when you
yeah,
think about like the amazingness of what
Right.
men are able to do,
Yeah. When
yeah,
you can appreciate that instead of judge it,
yeah.
that's a whole nother
I've always thought it
way
was
of seeing
fun
it.
to like
Yeah.
spend a day in a man's body and just like play with that energy because it's so young, it's so ready to go, it's so ripe and right there at the surface all the time. I was
exactly.
actually doing a training recently with on around BDSM and subdom stuff, and the guy he put his cock into a chastity.
Mhm.
And I was like, why do that? He's like, well, the truth is men have constant awareness of their penis all day long. And then when you put this chastity on it, it's even more there. So it's more prevalent. And I just thought that was so fascinating to like highlight the thing that is already such a thing for them in order to just, experience themselves more.
Well, two things arise for me when I hear you say that. One is an immediate threat. My system goes, oh, threat, expectation. Oh my God, something's going to happen and I'm not ready
Yeah.
for it. And I have to somehow, there's an obligatory, threatening, oh God, this is a setup, right?
Yeah, what do I do with
Yeah, yeah,
this?
yeah. So
Yeah.
I really love the opportunity to totally celebrate. Wow, how fun, how interesting, how easy, like,
Yeah.
and also how difficult. I can appreciate that that's not always comfortable, having the spontaneous things just happen out of your control. So like there's a lot of cool material there.
Yeah.
And then the
And
other thing is, oh, there was something else, but oh well, it'll flip back in. Yeah.
well, and I want to add to what you were saying about how they're always conscious, they're always present, and that is because men's sexuality is really at the surface. So is their genitalia. It's out there, right? It's visible, and so they have very relatively easy access to it. Whereas it's very different with responsive sexual desire, where there needs to be other things that lead you to open up, which is again reflective of women's genitalia, and open up and enter a space where you can access sexuality. And
Y-
both are equally beautiful, equally right. There's nothing wrong with
Right.
them, but they're extremely different.
And I think it's also fair to mention that not all men are wired that way. Not all penis owners have
It's true.
spontaneous response. My partner doesn't. And because I don't, we both are like, okay, well, who initiates? Who starts?
Yeah.
Who feels it when no one feels it?
Yeah.
Like you need all these outside forces to bring the energy
Yeah.
up to the surface. And so that's another unique thing to navigate when both people desire to have more sexual intimacy. But it's hard to go, well, I like it, but how I don't feel it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, making sure you're co-creating that with purpose and intention, even when you
Exactly.
don't feel like it, is another thing to contend with.
And that's exactly how I approach this is um I have couples where mostly men with spontaneous sexual desire and women with responsive. And what I teach them is exactly that. How do you intentionally create a context where where you can access that? Because it's not on the surface and no one is initiating it first, at least what you described, like when there's two responsive partners. But that where it can where it can arise, and you have to be intentional. You have to, like I said, create that spaciousness, make that time, and know how to access these different corners of you where there is where sexual desire lives. For some people, it may be through emotional and energetic connection, the eye gaze, the talking vulnerably. For others, it could be through sensual touch, through opening up by really surrendering your body to each other. For others, it's some combination of those two.
Is
For
this
others,
the
it may be play.
responsive that you're explaining right now? Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. And when you have two partners, you still have to do the exact. Let me start over. When you have two responsive partners, you have to do that even more intentionally because there's no one partner who is going to initiate. But
Mm.
that's exactly what I do with couples as well, even when there is a spontaneous partner, because they also have to learn this way, because the very direct, very suggestive way of just going straight into sex doesn't work for them, especially if their female partner is highly sensitive.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then they
Especially.
and
She's
then they
getting
have the
me.
wound of like feeling rejected all the time and
Right.
feeling undesired and also being kind of bitter and angry at always being the initiator.
Yeah.
And what
Absolutely.
that makes them feel is being this undesired burden,
Yeah.
and how shut down their sex becomes because it feels like it's unwanted or
Yeah.
unappreciated.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Or they
So
get pity sex or sex out of
right.
obligation from their partner, which also feels terrible.
Becomes
Yeah.
such a vicious cycle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's really painful.
Especially as the years go on. And then
Right.
you're like, let's just put it to rest. Let's just not do
Right.
it
This
at
is
all.
just too hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
It's
painful.
exhausting for both
Mhm.
partners, and they typically get into an attachment dance where one is the pursuer and the other one is avoidant, and that is triggering on a whole nother level of bringing up attachment wounds, and it can get very tangled up and very emotionally painful.
Mm.
I'd love for you to share with us a success story of
Yeah.
a
I was
long-term relation. Were you thinking the same thing,
well,
Willow?
my question was like, how many months, like on this year-long spectrum that you're having people commit to, like about where do they start to see a shift?
Yeah, well, I have many success stories, which all of them are on my website. But to
Great.
answer your question of when they see shifts, is that I've designed my process in such a way that they start to see shifts from the first conversation, from feeling validated in their experience to having a different language, to different vocabulary to use with each other, a more emotionally attuned vocabulary rather than one about complaints or the practicalities. And so they really, again, experience a whole different way of approaching the problem. And gosh, which success story should I mention? Well, one of them is that I started working with a couple right when COVID started. So it was literally like March of 2020. And they had just had a child 2 years prior, and their sex life came to a halt. And for the first year and a half, we had sessions with one of them holding the kid on their lap while we worked through things. And their challenge was, like I said, sex came to a halt when there was a child. The man was the higher desire partner. He was resentful. He was also touch starved, both because there was a new baby, but also because there was no more connection or intimacy or closeness between them. And they had, of course, contemplated divorce. In the year prior, they had consulted with two therapists who basically told them, you have no chance of making it. You should just get
Wow.
divorced.
Crazy.
Yeah. And now 4 years later, they are thriving. He left his job, his kind of professional job, to do something that he's passionate about. They're connected. They're having sex. They're talking about sex and what they want to do with each other. And there's just a beautiful example of this kind of transformation of when you can really touch the deep emotional hurt and wounds behind the loss of sex in a relationship from both perspectives, from the men's perspective and the woman's, because they're different, but equally, of course, valid. And clear some of that pain or a lot of the pain, you can build such beautiful results on top of it.
So, share with us a little bit about the mismatch in desire levels and how you approach that. Is it quality over quantity? When you have a partner who it just feels like you can't keep up with their level of desire. It feels like an impossible task.
Gosh, this could take a whole day because there's so much.
It's so deep.
This is a week-long retreat workshop.
Exactly. Well, a lot of the mismatched sexual desires come from a misunderstanding about like I said, the spontaneous and the responsive sexual desire, because in the beginning of a relationship, it looks like the two desires are the same.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because in the beginning, we are being driven by sex hormones, right? We are driven to hook up.
Cocktail on the planet. Is it a good
Exactly. And why? Because we need to procreate. We need to hook up and make a baby. And this is true whether you're 20 or 82. That is still there, right? That natural sexual hormonal cocktail. But what happens, especially for women or those with a responsive sexual desire in the long term, has nothing to do with any of those sex hormones. So over time, it starts to look like they have different sexual desires, that there's a big disparity. There's a higher desire partner and there's a lower desire partner. But again, that's what it looks like on the surface. Because if we look back to the beginning, we also were doing a lot of other things that were very conducive to women's sexual desire coming alive. There was a tremendous amount of connection. We were spending time on the phone talking to each other during the night, and we couldn't wait to see each other. And there was texting during the day, and there was just like not having enough of each other.
Having
Dressing up.
anticipation.
Exactly.
Shaving your
Hearts are
legs,
open.
getting your nails
Just
done.
like all this zhuzhing and
Yeah.
just bringing out the
Exactly.
best of you and the best in them, and just so
Exactly.
much easier with all that openness happening.
Exactly. And so, but we forget that. And we
Yeah.
think that, oh, now we are different. We have different desires. And no, the men's sexual desire, the spontaneous one, it was easy to trigger before, and it's still very easy, right? All he has to do is wake up in the morning and he's hard,
Right.
right? It does not take much. But all those elements that were there in the beginning go by the wayside. Like, again, taking time for yourself, taking time to be with each other, doting on each other, all of that gets replaced by responsibilities, by kids, by pets, by all the to-do list things. And so that affects women's responsive sexual desire. She's no less sexual. She's just not getting the essential nutrients for that sexual desire to come alive.
I like the way you just said that. Yeah, the essential nutrients. It's like a
Yeah.
plant, and it stopped
Absolutely.
getting watered. It stopped getting fed. And so why is it dying?
Well, and I'm sure
thirsty.
this can be very individual, right, per women. I mean, different things turn different people on, but there's got to be a lot of commonalities too. I mean, I think sometimes just too much proximity to your partner has a way of it's like, it's hard to feel turned on by the person you see all the time, who handles all your complaints, whose complaints you handle all the time, and who you wake up next to, and no one gets dressed up anymore. And it's just like life is just efforting.
Yeah.
And so what is some of the advice that's pretty across the board helpful
Yeah.
in terms of creating more spark or more interest so that juice can be recalibrated?
Well, building on what you said about proximity and being bogged down with all the practical things, the complaints or what's going on, I think the key is not necessarily changing the proximity, but changing the relationship with your partner. And that is going from focusing on practicalities to having heart-to-heart connection.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's what gets lost when life takes over. We focus on all the practicalities, but we forget that we are there. There's a human underneath the complaints or the to-do list. And so, the advice to have to have a date night which is often coupled with a sex.
Yeah.
Sex.
Exactly. But this advice means that we're going to have connection once a week. For the rest of the time, we're just going to face each other in this practical way. And that's not enough. It's
Yeah.
about having heart-to-heart connection. And it doesn't mean you have to get, lovey-dovey and all that.
Right.
It's asking questions about your daily experience. Like if you are having trouble with your boss, hey, what's that like? What do you wish would change, or how does it impact you? Or what does it
matters
bring
to you
up for
about
you? What
this? Yeah.
matters? Exactly.
How would you like
Uh,
it to be different? It's those
exactly.
open-ended questions.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I have
But
some good
getting
ones
to
that we were just workshopping that I want to share with everyone. I always, inside of one of our programs, Leah and I's programs, we have the deepest heart's desires. And I think that's a really good practice for couples to do at least once a month with each other, where they just sit down and for 3 minutes, one person speaks and the other listens. And it's like, what is your deepest heart's desire? And you just speak
Mhm.
about that for 3 minutes. And then you say what that felt like to you,
Yeah.
what's the reflection of the listener. And then you swap. And so that's a really great question. And then I just had 3 more come through my sphere, which is what wants to be known, what wants to be held, and what wants to be helped. And so I think it really helps people get in touch with those deeper parts of themselves that's so easy to gloss over. Oh, I'll just distract with social media or something else. I'll watch TV instead of like going deeper and finding out what's true for themselves. I mean, that's the beauty of being in relationship is you
Yeah.
have somebody to be there to listen and to hopefully to listen and to be a reflection, something to
Well,
look into.
and I think it's
Absolutely.
important that the conversation isn't a conversation that ends. There's no ending. It's a
Exactly.
continuating thing.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about the Gottman's work is, remembering to continue to dream together. Just because you've been together for a decade or more doesn't mean that you don't still co-create dreams. I love one of his examples is, if we had all the money, how would you redecorate the bedroom?
That's a
If
great,
we
yeah.
could remodel the house, what are the things that you would love to do to it? Or if we could go on any vacation in January, where would you want to go? And how would that be different from the vacation we'd go on in July? And it's just like being
Yeah.
able to reignite getting to know each other and not
Yeah.
taking for granted that just because I know so much about you and that I think I know everything about you, but there's still corners that haven't been investigated. And let's help each other investigate that.
Yeah. And we're constantly changing. So those corners, new ones might
Yeah.
reveal themselves. We might learn something about
Exactly.
ourselves or transform. And it is a matter of constantly learning,
Yeah,
continuously
fosters
being
closeness.
curious. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're not just getting closer to your partner when you engage in this type of conversation, but you're also getting closer to who you are. And
Yeah.
you get a
Absolutely.
moment to reflect and be witness so that you understand yourself on a deeper level, which has so much value.
Yeah.
And then you're
Yeah.
letting your partner see that and bask in that. And I think that that's just something that really serves connection and longevity, so you're not getting bored and so you're not taking each other for granted, but you're going on some of
Absolutely.
those rides, and that creates that kind of quality time that even if that's not your primary love language, it's going to enrich you. And
Absolutely.
it kind of reminds me, just kind of piggybacking on this topic, is one of the things Esther Perel mentions, it's like observing your partner when they're in their genius zone. Like how sexy that is. Like
Yeah.
what a turn on that is. When your partner is just being their magical selves in the realm of their domain, it's like you just go, you just are watching them shine, and that shine shimmers on you too. Sometimes I
Absolutely.
know for a lot of people who have kids, watching their partner be with their kids and watching like what an amazing parent they are, it turns them on so much. I think that that's so precious. I don't have kids, but if I did, I know my husband would be one of those. You just have to look at play at the kids, and you're like, as soon as you're done, meet me in the bedroom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which speaks to that again, we're responsive to a lot of different things.
That's right.
And it's about understanding our own those essential nutrients and creating a way to a context where they can be met.
No,
And
I
that's
imagine
key.
there are some people that are so disconnected from what turns them on. It's like they've been so out of touch with, okay, I'm just learning now that I'm responsive. shit, what does that even mean? I don't even know where to start. I haven't responded to anything in so long that I don't even know what opens me. I don't feel juicy. I don't know how to be turned on. This all feels so overwhelming, like I'm still trying to fix this thing that's broken inside of me. Where do they start? What do you suggest?
Well, actually, piggybacking to this whole topic we were talking about, that those questions, those open-ended questions. So the three questions I teach my clients pretty much in the beginning is asking each other, what will have you feel loved today? What will have you feel supported? And what will have you feel desired? And
Great question.
that third question is so hard for people. I just finished working with this couple in their mid-30s, and the woman, when I proposed these questions to them, she started crying because it was not a question that she ever asked herself or anyone asked her. What would have you feel desired? Or what do you want? Right? She only knew how to show up for sex, how to do it for others. But for her, how do you want to be desired was again a really foreign
Great
question.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's and there's all different kinds of people and genders and orientations who can't answer that question, and also can't answer like what is their deepest heart's desire, like and not just in the sexual realm, but like what is their deepest heart's desire. And I think it's we're so busy surviving that we don't know how to thrive. We don't know how to get in touch with just what that deeper desire is. Or it feels like it doesn't matter if I find out what my deepest desire is sexually or in my heart, because it's never going to be met. There's that belief that like, well, it's never been met before, so what makes me think that anything is going to change for me in this world? And so there's like you were saying, a lot of blocks to break down and break through. That's such an important part of the process.
And I think one of the most important things we can do to prevent, especially girls and women, of not being able to answer this question is to ask this question to girls, to ask them to look inside themselves and start to develop a vocabulary about what they want. Because when girls hit puberty, they start to shapeshift to be wanted by others. And it's about what do you want? What's important to you?
How do you want to feel?
How do you want to feel? Exactly. And this question needs to be posed to girls very early. This is the best sex education that you can give to children, which has nothing to do with sex, but it prepares them to be able to answer this question because they're used to it. They're used to looking inside. They're used to having that permission to think about what they want.
So is that just a general question, just a simple, what do you want? Is that the question you're proposing? Because I think we have we've made this habit in our culture of normalizing boy sexuality, right? We're teaching them about their wet dreams. We're teaching them about their spontaneous erections. Like there's a lot more information we really avoid talking about and normalizing girls' sexual impulses and the sexualization of who we get to be as women, that we get to be sexual beings as well. And that we are sexual beings right out the gate, as if somehow we turn 13 and everything wakes up, is such a falsehood. We are feeling and sensing and these alive, sensual creatures. We are wired this way. We have the skin, we have these smells, we have everything that we can see. And it's like, at what age do you recommend parents start helping us normalize? And then how do we normalize female sexuality? Such an interesting topic. And
It is.
we haven't spent a lot of time engaging that, but it's one that I'm really curious about.
Yeah, well, I think there are age-appropriate segments of this. So a big piece is, of course, consent. So starting with very young age, asking, like, for example, a parent goes to brush a girl's hair, asking, do you like this? What do you like about this? Is it okay if I touch it, brush your hair this way? Or would you like to do it differently? So again, giving the girls opportunities to listen to their own body and what's happening, because it may be obviously a normal thing, a parent brushing their child's hair, but they might be holding on, they might be allowing this because they need to do it, but they're not saying, hey, actually, I would prefer that you do it differently.
Right. Or
So
my favorite way for you
my
to do
favorite
it.
way,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
yeah, what's the part you don't like the most about it? I mean, because
Exactly.
you got to brush your hair. We're going to have to brush your hair. So, do you have a preferred way? Which side feels the best? And allowing them to kind of explore the sensation of what they feel
Exactly.
like from the top, from the bangs going back versus the sides versus being pulled up and doing whatever they're doing with the hair. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then they can use that vocabulary and that also ease about it. The
Mhm.
earlier you do it, the more at ease they're going to be with their body being a different way.
It
And being
cultivates agency, really.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Beautiful.
And then as a child gets older, then you can start talking about maybe some uncomfortable feelings and versus comfortable feelings and helping them be with that. So, I remember when my breasts were developing, that was an incredibly uncomfortable feeling.
Yes.
I all of a sudden started to feel the clothes on me and the sensation and the overstimulation. And of course, no one talked about it. And so
Right.
I would have benefited tremendously even before it happened, that I was supported in understanding that my body might feel uncomfortable or it might feel really pleasant, and that
Right.
it's okay. And to give again that permission to have all of these different experiences and to not think any of them are bad, that none of them
Yeah.
make us broken, but that some of them may be uncomfortable and hard to be with,
Yeah.
Yeah.
hard to
Even just
handle.
having a safe place. So, God, they ache. Why they ache so
Yeah,
much? I'm just like,
yeah,
they won't ache forever. This is just
exactly.
that period.
Uh,
Just having someone be sensitive to, like, yeah, they hurt. They're overly sensitive, and
Yeah,
maybe even navigating. Let's go feel different textures.
exactly.
And see if we can't find you a bra that feels more comfortable. Maybe we can get some different fabric for you.
Yeah.
I was really lucky I got that as a teen because
Did you? Your
I
mom
had
was
a
a
nurse
nurse.
mom,
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
I started developing boobs in second grade, end of second grade, so early. And
Yeah.
I came home from school. I was like, we were doing jumping jacks and it hurt here,
Yeah.
and she was like, oh, and she, introduced me to the bras and the styles and the
Yeah.
fabrics and all. It was
That's
really sweet.
great.
Yeah, I got lucky.
Then there's the other dynamic of growing up in households where there's just so much shame in the conversation of sexuality that's like a whole nother hurdle. I know that in some instances, if my mom had tried to have conversations, even just about, nipples hurting and growing and stuff, I would have felt sick inside. There would
It would
have
have been
been a shame
uncomfortable.
attack would have been
Yeah.
occurring as a part of my sensitivity and not being able to read, is this her shame? Is this my shame? Is this the church's shame? Like, and I could get flooded so easily, and then I'd feel sick, and then I would like want to really retreat. It would be
Yeah.
the overexposure of even talking about bodies made me feel really ill. And it might also have to do with sexual trauma happening at the same time. So it was very complex
Right.
for some of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Navigating that as a cultural issue that's probably not as it's probably more common than we might realize.
And coming back to being highly sensitive, for me, there was a lot of shame about sex and sexuality because my mom tried to talk to me about it, but it was not in an attuned way. It was
Uh-huh.
not coming
Mhm.
from connection or from easing into it or building up from what I mentioned earlier, giving me permission and teaching me how to connect to myself. It was
Mm.
just
Right.
out of
Bombarded
absolutely
one day.
nowhere.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was completely overwhelmed and shut down not because I was in any way influenced by cultural or religious shame, but because I could not contain my reaction. It was like I got hit by a truck, and I'm supposed to somehow react positively to that.
Oh,
Mm.
interesting.
So
Right.
that too is that attunement piece, especially to highly sensitive people, is very important.
Yeah.
Especially if you have that cultural religious shame on top of it,
Right.
because then it's just this. You get caught in an avalanche, and you
Yeah.
can't
Right.
stop your own reaction. You dissociate. You get knocked out, and that's really
So
important to manage.
if someone's listening right now and they've got a friend, a kid, a partner, whoever, and they're watching the avalanche happen, and what's the first thing they should do when they're in the presence of, okay, again, this is they're flooding? Is it just to kind of, should they physically move their body, give them a little bit of space around the other person's system? What advice do you have if they're just navigating this for the first time and they're watching it roll out?
Well, so when that flooding is happening, the nervous system is going into fight or flight, or bypassing fight or flight and going into freeze. And what that means is that the person is threatened. The nervous system is threatened. And if you're having a conversation with someone who's being flooded, you are the threat.
Mm-hmm.
And so the key piece is to acknowledge that for yourself. Whoa, I see I'm contributing to that. And one of the best ways to not necessarily stop the avalanche, but to at least prevent it from taking out a village, is to acknowledge that, hey, I think I went a little too far with you. I'm so sorry. I'm going to back off.
Beautiful.
Or I see I triggered something painful, and I can see that what I said did that. I'm so sorry. I'm going to back off. And let the other person start to get a sense that the threat is backing off, that they don't
Nice.
have to do anything, that they don't have to react to that.
Okay.
And then again, the second piece is what I shared earlier. Talk about this outside of, hey, I realized what I said was really too much. How can we do this differently next time?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
beautiful. That's great
And I
advice.
think too, for the person who's flooded, if they can name that in the moment, if they can be aware that their nervous system has gone into overwhelm, if they have their finger on the pulse of that, that can be really helpful for the person who's, causing the trigger, the flooding, to take responsibility for their side of it too. And the beautiful thing about it is nobody's wrong. Nobody
Exactly.
is
Misbehaving.
Yeah, it's really just, it's an opportunity to learn how to be with each other in a way that works for both of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Irene. This has been a really delightful conversation. I think it's going to really land with so many people listening. And I think this is an important conversation for us to grow in skill and in delight. I think we've got we feel so it's so conflicting, all the emotions, because we judge ourselves so harshly.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when we're judging ourselves harshly, we project that onto someone else with a judgment for them. And we just find ourselves in so much turmoil, when really we can see this a little bit differently if we can breathe some space between ourselves and see that this is actually an adventure we get to go on. And that when we're learning about our partner and we're learning about ourselves, it's really quite thrilling. And
Yeah.
if we just have to kind of get curious and find ways to get out of the judgment so that we can have those breakthroughs, and then we can really have some really impactful, exciting, transcendent love occur in our bodies and with
It's
each
so
other.
worth it, everybody.
Yeah.
It's so
Exactly.
worth it. So
Yeah.
Irene, where can our listeners find you?
So you can find me on my website, which is irenefehr.com. There's a wealth of information on all the topics that I talked about. I have a very active blog and an email list. And I also, if I may mention, there's something I'm doing that's new that I'm super excited about,
Great.
which is offering men a support group to be able to get validated in their experience when they are in a sexless marriage where the partner doesn't want to work on it or is unable to work on it for whatever reason. Whereas my area has always been around women's sexual desire. But again, a lot of the times the women are not able to do it. And so I'm partnering
Wow.
with a sex therapist and men's group facilitator to hold men's group where there's one woman, me, but to offer this to men. I'm super excited to do that. And that's also on my website.
Oh, I'm
Love
so
that.
excited to hear
Yeah.
about this. I've got people I will refer you to.
Yeah.
And so Fehr is spelled Fehr, IreneFehr.com. Be sure to go check her out. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Also, stay tuned because next up it's Dr. Willow and Leah, and we're going to dish it all out.
Now, our favorite part, the dish.
Well, very important topic.
Oh my God. I know so many HSPs, males, females, and everyone in between, actually. And, I think what we're swimming in culturally is a lot of desensitization. And it takes a lot of courage to be a sensitive person in this world and to sensitize yourself further. And that is, of course, the work that we do, is to help people find more sensation and more capacity for pleasure and happiness in their bodies. And I think that, helping couples specifically like understand the highly sensitive person and the person who doesn't really have a frame of reference for that, because they're very comfortable in that sort of more desensitized environment.
Well, I think what's also interesting is when you don't know that you're a highly sensitive person, all the numbing you practice in order to get out of the hell of being overstimulated. And that's something that I really relate to. This is the reactions you get from other people when you can't contain this much sensation in your system is really unpleasant. You feel like there's a feeling of like rejection or being too much, or, all the things that she touched on. And then, getting through other social things. And so it's just very easy to turn to drugs and alcohol and food
and
sex, shopping and sex, and ways to
social
sort
media.
of get out of all of this sensation.
Yeah.
I think that's probably been a part of my issue with food my whole life. Is I'm just trying to get away from whatever this sensation is in my system that feels like I can't manage it. And so I need something else to change the sensation, because you just don't know how to slow the world down enough to figure out what's going on. And so, and you have to be in the world.
Right.
You got no choice.
Unless you want to go off grid, which is always an option.
Right. And then I think about all the like mothers out there who are barely hanging on. Think about I can be so overly stimulated around young babies and lots of kids. Or too many pets all in the backyard. If there's like 5 dogs in one place, it's like, oh my God, overload. And I love dogs.
Yeah.
Or too many kids, like at a hotel pool, I just can't enjoy myself. I have to use all of my meditative tools of just zoning out noise, which I have learned to be very good at. I can really be in kind of crazy environments. I tune it all out.
Yeah.
But you just think about that, and you don't know how much people are struggling that sometimes we take for granted.
Just to maintain like a sense of presence and balance in the moment. It can be really intense. I've always been a highly sensitive person, but I've been very fortunate to be able to. I think the Qigong has been a huge part of what's and force fields around me, because I've been working with people and their bodies for over 20 years, and like going deep into people's somatic stuff and, holding space for them and their overwhelm. And I think doing that for so long at such a deep level has really allowed me to like I can go to festivals, and I can be next to the airport or the freeway and the noise and stuff. It's also HSPs, like for some noise, it's a huge thing, whereas others noise isn't such a huge thing. So there's all kinds of factors.
Right.
She mentioned the name of the woman who sort of coined the term and wrote a book on it. I don't remember, but
I don't either. But I'll attune to it during the editing and make sure it's in the show notes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really important thing for people to know about, because even if you are not an HSP, the chances that you know one is very, very high. And so it will help you be in relationship to them in a different way.
Yeah, it kind of also reminds me of a little bit of the erotic blueprints and sort
Yeah.
of if you were to categorize,
Yeah.
again, the two combinations that may struggle the most together, the energetic and the sexual,
Hmm.
where, the sexual is just like, come on, it's not that hard.
Yeah.
It's
Let's just
just
fuck.
be
Come on.
spontaneous. Like it's fun,
Yeah.
And where the energetic is like, I need things just so,
Uh-huh.
and don't come too fast,
Uh-huh.
like your energy's too much, and
Yeah.
just always trying to navigate
Yeah.
this thing. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's wild. And I one of the things I would have loved to have gotten into more in the interview had we had time, and maybe we can navigate this the next time, is really exploring when it's when a man has this responsive desire and is a highly sensitive person.
Yeah.
How is that? And there may not be any unique features between a man's experience and a woman's experience. But I can't tell you how many times I've come across women, or I've been in a relationship myself where it seemed like my libido was higher, my desire was higher, their sensitivity was higher. It made it kind of tricky. They're always oftentimes feeling like, why won't you just fuck me? Yeah, I know you've worked with clients too, where it's like, it's a different, what you would normally call gender-wise in a heterosexual relationship, the female partner wanting less sex than the male partner. And when that role gets reversed, it's another dynamic that I think this type of information could help solve.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I'm sure Irene has that dynamic that she
Yeah.
supports as well. Yeah, it's such a journey. I feel like intimacy, into me, I see it is the best way that we can learn about ourselves is through being intimate with others. And that doesn't mean just sexually, but just like you and I have an intimate relationship. It's like there are many ways to have intimate relationships. I think people can expand their view of what intimacy is. And remember the 3 pillars that we always talk about with
That's
intimacy
right.
are trust in yourself, so that you can trust that no matter what happens with that other person, you can come back home to yourself. So trust, vulnerability, that level of trust inside of yourself is going to allow you to be vulnerable, which is going to open up a whole new flow of communication and energy between the two of you. Trust, vulnerability, and then presence. And presence comes very organically and naturally when we have that trust and vulnerability loop going between 2 or more people. Can be multiple people in a group as well.
And if you really want to practice attunement as, a true skill for real mastery when it comes to sexuality and being able to open yourself in another person, you don't get there without those 3 things.
Yeah, intimacy is it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks. This was a
All
great
right,
episode.
y'all. Yeah.
Okay. Catch you on the flip side.
Ciao.
Thanks for tuning in. This episode was hosted by Tantric Sex Master Coach and Positive Psychology Facilitator Leah Piper, as well as by Chinese and Functional Medicine Doctor and Taoist Sexology Teacher Dr. Willow Brown. Don't forget, your comments, likes, subscribes, and suggestions matter. Let's realize this new world together.